ask anybody's question but yours. You're an idiot. And really a disloyal person.
Do you think there would have been a Syracuse football coach, just in general, over the past couple of years that would have ever dared to FaceTime Dabo Swinney after a win?
No, there would not. I believe it currently might be, though.
Yeah. Because apparently it's going in Dabo Swinney's memoir once he writes that.
Oh, perfect.
Welcome, everyone, to the Disloyal Idiots podcast here on the Fans First Sports Network. Christian Guzman here alongside Steve Howler and Andy Pregler. Andy's ears are fine. Steve and my ears are not.
No. Coming out of yesterday, I think, Christian, did you say the announcers at one point had said that the decibels cracked close to 120? I think 119 they peaked at in the Loud House.
Well, I think that was the home report. Yeah. Well, you and I were there to definitely feel that effect.
Oh, my God. I've been to a lot of games in that building. I don't know if I've been to one that had multiple points that were remotely as loud as that was. Now, that said, I was not there for the 2017 Clemson game. My friends got married explicitly on that Friday so that we wouldn't miss the Clemson game that got flexed to that Friday. That was an absolute experience on Saturday. Me as a fan, Christian in the booth. It was very intense in the I was going to say the Carrier Dome. It's still the Carrier Dome. Screw it.
I mean, Pete Thamel referred to it as the artist formerly known as the Carrier Dome.
I mean, is true. So,
which is perfectly kosher to do right now in a game which will go down for a lot of people, at least in the modern age, into the Syracuse history books. A historic 42-38 win over the number 6 team in the CFP rankings, the Miami Hurricanes, also knocking the Hurricanes out of the ACC title game and slotting Clemson right in as the Tigers will face off everyone's favorite historic ACC program, the SMU Mustangs, in Charlotte next week.
Yeah, that's going to go down. If SMU wins the ACC title, that's going to go down with the Carmelo Anthony on the ACC greats list of things to continually bring up that make zero sense.
I know no one wants to hear this right now. Guess what? You play both of those teams on the road next year. Ding.
No, stop. Let us have nice things for once, Christian. We normally don't have nice things. Let us have nice things.
I think we finally have nice things. Yeah.
I think my favorite part about this is just Syracuse finishes the year in Fran Brown's first season at 9-3, which even the most optimistic of us said was probably a long shot. 8-4 was really about as high as we could go here. And depending on who you talk to, I do know that they exist, even though I think they're crazy. There are fans who are upset that we're not 11-1. Now, we're not going to talk about how percentages play out, but my point here is less about, oh man, this season could have been even better. It's that for the first time in my lifetime as a Syracuse fan, Syracuse was in 11 out of 12 games that they played, and the 12th game that they were not in any way, shape, or form was a true meltdown game where, look, they probably should have played infinitely better and probably had a chance to win that game if they played even at their C level instead of an F level. Even the Maroon teams that were probably the best of my Syracuse fandom were outmatched pretty heavily by either Big Ten or Pac-12 opponents that were scheduled for one-off games. Cough, cough, USC is coming to mind here a lot. And that team would go on to share a split of the Big East Conference title game, or the Big East Conference crown that year. To me, it's just absolutely remarkable that in year one, Fran Brown showed that by heavily leveraging the transfer portal, and going after big time recruits and giving certain freshmen playing time, you can build a competitive program here at Syracuse. Now, as Christian mentioned, next year's schedule will really put this to the test in a way that is an offseason discussion point. But focusing on this season, it was weird listening to a college football podcast where they were talking about how Virginia Tech might have to make a coaching change because they were pitched on a 4 or 5 year plan and Syracuse was able to execute a 1 year plan. Like the idea that Syracuse is now a standard to which coaches are being held to in their first year in the ACC is remarkably insane. Like that is an insane statement.
It shows you a couple things, though. It shows you that, for one, Dino Babers, for all him needing to go, did not leave the cupboards as bare as past regimes have. Even though there's a bunch of turnover, a lot of the key players are guys that came in to Syracuse not in the transfer portal. Pena was here, Gadsden was here, a chunk of the interior line was here. The good number of the defensive players are all Babers guys. The cupboard, it's not like when Schaefer handed the reins to Babers or when Robinson handed the reins to Marone, where it was like, oh God, what do we do? And Fran was able to take full advantage of that, look at the chaff he needed to trim from the roster, send that on its merry way, bring in new guys, recruit the hell out of it. And in his presser, he said, he legitimately said, he's like, yeah, we can recruit, no problem. Like we'll get guys in. We don't have to worry about that. It's the culture stuff that he built and changed and was able to take a lot of the existing guys as well as his new guys and get them to buy into what a first-year head coach who has not coached before was selling. And that is a task in its own right.
Steve, how early did you get to the game?
I think it was cold as hell out. When did I get the parking lot or when did I get to the game?
When did you get into the dome?
Into the dome probably about 25 before kick.
Did you see the people on the sideline?
No, I was trying to get around. We made the mistake of trying to go take a look at Marion Victory Court, which is awesome, by the way. But when we got in there, and it took us until about 12 minutes before kick to get around to 308, and that was going the quick way.
So what you missed was the sheer amount of people that were on the sideline who were clearly recruits.
Yeah, recruits and families.
Recruits and family, and in Fran's case, some immediate family and friends from Camden.
Yeah,
but the majority of people there on the sideline pregame, I would have to assume were recruits. And Steve, you've seen it. Andy, you've seen it when you've been at the dome. We've talked about there's so many people on the sideline. Well, this week pregame, not only were there people on the sideline, it wrapped around to the end zone as well and filled up probably about 80% of the back end zone as well.
Kind of like in between our shoot and the away shoot.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that continues to show again. Also, yes, it does help that, this was a pretty good weekend for, recruits to go up to visit in terms of the timing wise with Thanksgiving and everything. But at the same time, shows you how much momentum Fran is still, holding on to, especially with recruiting, chops he's still bringing here in the Northeast. And it shows you kind of just the program builder that Fran still is, even, 12 games into the season.
Yeah, and I think, again, for those that might not be following, I had a friend reach out to me and basically ask the question I think is on everybody's mind, because we're going to talk about Kyle McCord's record-setting season, and this season, I don't know if you guys knew this, but with the game on Saturday and with all college football games wrapping, Syracuse finishes the season as the #1 passing offense in the country. That is absolutely insane. And the question becomes, well, what is Syracuse going to do next? And the answer is kind of twofold. 2027, we've got an unranked quarterback committed out of this past game here. I guarantee you that you're going to start seeing stars fly in on that player. But now we're looking at a situation where Syracuse, we had a 4-star Virginia Tech commit. And again, I kind of mentioned Virginia Tech for a reason at the top of this show. A 4-star Virginia Tech quarterback commit, decommit in order to take his official visits, which were Iowa and Syracuse, with Syracuse being the second visit. So Peyton Falzone is a quarterback prospect who there's no crystal ball available on 24/7 yet. However, it would seem that based off of how these things usually go, Syracuse is probably in the driver's seat to land a 4-star freshman quarterback to come in next season. He's out of Nazareth, Pennsylvania, so right in that South Jersey, Eastern Pennsylvania corridor that Fran loves, and also is conveniently where Kyle McCord was originally from as well. It just feels to me, to Christian's point, this is something that we are pretty plugged into this. No one saw it coming. Like there is almost the only person who had it was the Virginia Tech beat writer who had the decommit. And I think that this is the part of the work that is really impressive to Fran, because we see and hear Fran a lot, but we actually don't see him all that much because we only see him on the radio show and we see him when he does the press conference. And it's really clear. There's an apparatus around Syracuse football that did not exist previously, that comes from a guy who worked at Georgia, bringing that infrastructure to Syracuse in a way that we've never experienced here before.
Yeah, and that's we're potentially having this Virginia Tech flip on top of 2 3-stars coming in Luke Carney and Rich Bielin. That the quarterback room goes pretty deep on the young kids. The question will be, do you rely on developing one of those kids? Or I think right now, Michael Washington Jr. is probably the backup, right? Whatever.
I think
one way or another,
right
it's him, Del Rio Wilson, some combination of them.
Yeah, right. I mean, first of all, I did preseason. We didn't realize that Michael Johnson Jr. had a potential to have an extra. And, and he does, which is great. I mean, I will say a lot of fans right now are clamoring for the LSU quarterback who just entered the transfer portal to have Fran take a look at him.
I mean, the thing though is, do you as a quarterback in the portal, do you look at what Nixon's doing and what happened this year and say, unless Nixon comes back, like if Nixon comes back, then 100% come here and scatter it out, do what you're doing, but without someone with that repertoire and that pro style feel, you're not walking into the same situation Kyle McCord was. Now, I don't believe Kyle McCord understood he was walking into that situation, but it sure as hell worked out for him.
Yeah, and I think that one of the other parts of this that needs to be talked about is the in-game adjustments, and this kind of dovetails into the Miami actual game recap here. This game was yet another game where Syracuse did not play a complete 60 minutes of football. And to be fair,
we only need 45, Andy. It's fine.
What even is
but I mean, like that's. But I think that this is the thing that you look around college football. There is no team except for maybe Oregon that has put together consistently 60 minutes of football. Like it turns out that in an era of transfer portaling, it's really hard to build cohesion and consistency, and that translates to the 12 games a year that you have to play. And so if that is going to just be the default status, having a coach who's able to make in-game adjustments and having a coach who is able to keep a team engaged for 60 minutes becomes incredibly important. And this game in particular I was bouncing back and forth. My dad's a Penn State fan. I was back home in Erie, Pennsylvania, watching, and I almost turned the game off because it was really apparent the secondary was not up for what Miami's game plan was. And you saw on a couple of plays, the secondary had clearly been told Miami is going to run the receivers towards the sidelines, and the entire secondary was cheating every single man in zone coverage. And the result of this was that when the receivers broke in, there was absolutely no one over the middle of the field, and Cam Ward was shooting fish in a barrel. And it was after that third Miami score that you saw, like, the TV cameras. I know you guys were both in the dome. The TV cameras cut to Fran doing his typical now absolute freak out where he is just screaming and he is yelling at people. And again, there's like an element of this to say, like, look, this isn't going to work every time. But clearly, the culture that he has, it works with this team. Because after those initial 21 points, Miami was having a lot of trouble stringing. They were getting the chunk plays, but a lot of those consistent throws over the middle evaporated. And you saw a lot of balls batted down. You saw a lot of contested coverages. The defensive execution fundamentally changed. And again, I think part of that is scheme, but I also just think part of that was just execution and Fran getting into the secondary. And on the flip side of that, you saw the pass rush stop trying to get Cam Ward up the middle, and they started really kind of chasing around the tackles. And Fadil Diggs, I don't think he ended up getting like any official sacks. I haven't looked at the box score.
Yeah, at least one. And it was that big one right in front of me.
And it was just funny because I quarterback pressures are such a nebulous stat, and oftentimes if the play is completed, they don't count it. There were so many times where he was running like 12 yards around a tackle, and you could tell Cam Ward was feeling Diggs on either shoulder.
He knew where number 10 was every single play.
And it was just
PFF
amazing
has,
to watch.
PFF has Diggs for 2 quarterback hits and 4 quarterback hurries, which is pretty significant.
Yeah, and I think that there's an argument to be made. You probably could have had 2 or 3 more of those. And it's just, again, it's wild to me, the defensive adjustments that were made in game so quickly after years of watching teams that didn't really ever adjust what they were doing in a game that was quote unquote out of hand.
Right. Or they would figure it out like 2 quarters too late. There was a stretch, literally we kept running, like we were sitting in something similar to a cover 2 that just left that belly completely wide open. And I'm sitting there like, I don't know if it was man under. There were a couple that I saw that was man under. And then there were a couple where it was like everybody's in a zone. And I was just like, son of a, just throw. It was like a rover would have been too shallow. And he was kind of hitting that seam right behind that where the safeties, basically in between the safeties who were stacked on whatever wideouts were out there. And it just over and over and over again hit that seam in the middle. And even towards the end of the game, they were still finding times where that was open, but at least they were able to shut that down to a degree. And that ability to alter things on the fly is something that Robinson and his staff have been very, very good at. Like after that first drive, I actually looked at my friend and was like, no, okay, that wasn't very pretty. They didn't completely carve us up, but Robinson will figure it out. And after the next 2, I was like, okay, maybe not as much, but ultimately he did. And they were able to put it together.
And you saw it in the change in Miami game plan as well, because towards the second half, Miami went to a lot of screens to their receivers, because what you started to see was as the game went on, as Miami started to challenge Syracuse defenders and especially the cornerbacks one-on-one, the cornerbacks were starting to win a lot more battles. I mean, I don't think Ward tested Clarence Lewis. Jade and Bellamy got a lot more comfortable as the game went on. And so the game plan shifted to basically put Restrepo and George in screens and give them blockers up front in order to get the yards they needed to move the change.
Though if you notice in those situations where they were in a zone and getting burnt, a lot of times they were picking on Lewis. So I don't know if that's something they saw in film where if Cuse is in a zone, throw it at Lewis because he's not picking them up as well as he is in a man on a dedicated receiver. Because there were a couple, especially very early, they went at Lewis those first and second drives quite a bit. And he ended up, turning it back around and turning it into a solid game.
But again, it also goes to show how much a difference makes playing behind versus playing ahead. Because once Syracuse got ahead, and all credit goes to Devin Grant for the fumble, which I know we'll talk about in a bit. But once you saw Syracuse get ahead, what also really, really helped out was Miami going away from the running game. Because, the defensive line had its moments, but didn't look, for me, at least in my opinion, didn't look particularly great the entire game. Because Miami's running backs were very, very good in getting at least 4 or 5 yards a carry. And once Syracuse got ahead, they finally forced Miami into more frequent passing downs, which just helped the defense as a whole in tremendous fashion.
You know what's funny? If you go by the PFF grades, who was the better quarterback?
Look, Cam Ward looked really good in this game. I'm not gonna take anything away from him there.
It's by decimal points.
I'm just saying, look, McCord had arguably what I think might be the game of his college career. I know the UConn game was more impressive statistically speaking, but
this was more impressive though.
Yeah, there was the Miami defense is not very good. Let's just make sure that we're clear there. But what McCord was able to do under pressure, early on, Miami was getting solid pressure on Syracuse, and that was what I thought was going to be the issue here. But there were a couple of drops. There were a couple of times where McCord made the completion but didn't put the ball in the best spot for his receiver. And again, that's some ticky-tack stuff here. But it's also to say that McCord was so on, that's really the only thing I can get on him for. The pass that got called back to Pena was just an absolute timing RPO read that was spot on all the way through. The deep ball to Pena where he threw it to only where Pena could get it, and he knew Pena was going to turn around and be able to get it there.
That ball was in the air as soon as he turned on that wheel. The ball was in the air and in his hands, exactly full stride. It was you could not have put that ball in a better spot.
There was just so many. Cam Ward had a couple of throws where he was rolling out and then just delivering absolute darts. Mm-hmm. And to be fair, that worked for a while. But
that's
Cam
his
Ward,
style of QB as well.
Mm-hmm.
He's much more think on his feet, be able to utilize outside the pocket. Not necessarily a scrambling or rushing quarterback, but especially shown by the way he dives, which is mildly hilarious.
Yeah. It was just so fun to watch two quarterbacks absolutely duel it out. But the difference was, and I think, again, this goes back to Fran, and if you want to talk about, hey, why did Fran Brown leave Kyle McCord in the pit game? That was a quarterback who, when they were down 21-0, did not question how Syracuse was going to get back into this one. It was going to be on his arm. It was going to be running an excellent game plan. And he also had a lot of help, not just from Trevor Pena, but from LaQuint Allen, who the broadcaster made some Saquon Barkley comparisons which might be a little premature, but the dude was hurdling guys like Saquon Barkley and was running over guys like Saquon Barkley and catching screens like Saquon Barkley. It was just one of these games where, again, we talk about Kyle McCord having the game of his career. LaQuint Allen will always have the Pinstripe Bowl against Minnesota, but I thought that this was probably Allen's most impressive game. And yes, I'm including the UNLV game in this one as well.
I mean, like, a lot of fans are going to look at Allen's stats at this game and see 22 rushes for, I believe, 88 yards, which, you know, for a running back, you would think, oh, that's not the particularly exciting. It's 22 rushes for 82 yards. But you forget the 6 catches for 61 yards also.
Yeah.
Which for most wide receivers in general is a pretty decent game. So the fact that you add on 22 rushes for 82 yards and also 2 touchdowns to boot on the ground, like, it's hard to overstate the value that Allen brings. I mean, there's a reason why Fran is always, like, you know, harped on how Allen is, you know, the toughest, most important guy on the team. There's a reason for that. I mean, he was even lobbying in the post-game conference. Hey, you guys in the media, you've got to tell him to come back for another year. So,
yeah. The presser, if anyone hasn't seen Brown's presser or even the player pressers,
both.
It was a great one yesterday. Fran, watching that press conference, I mean, watching most of the press conferences this year, but 100%, I mean, Christian, you're always in the room with it. Watching him just talk about this team, you understand how these players are, you know, willing to run through a wall for him. He throws it out there, you know, he doesn't mince words. He doesn't try and throw coach speak on it. He just tells you what he's thinking. Like, he literally called out, I think one, he was like, who was saying we don't win in November? What's up now? I was like, okay. Like, he's just straight up calling. He's like, I told the guys to party tonight and to look after each other and get back to work tomorrow. And, you know, stuff like that where he gets it and these kids will be able to respond to what he's got going and where he's leading this program.
Can we talk about my guy, Devin Grant, for a second?
Yeah.
I mean, again, change the game with the stripper for Strepro.
Yep.
And running it all the way back. Here again, for those who didn't watch the Fran Brown presser, here's the more impressive part about that Devin Grant play. He's been playing for the past 4 weeks with a torn MCL.
Yep.
It's amazing, again, what we're talking about, what Fran is getting out of these guys. And again, like, to a coaching point here, there was something on film that they must have seen with Restrepo and with Miami's first choice running back with the way that they carry the ball. Because every single time, and again, sometimes it was to their detriment, but with those two guys specifically, the intent was not wrap this guy up. It was rip this ball out.
Yeah, Fletcher more than Martinez, but yeah.
I believe Restrepo had a fumble last week as well.
Yeah, and again, like, that's like us. Again, we've all played NCAA 25. You can jack that slider up for fun, anyways. But it was very clearly on Martinez and Restrepo because every other play, at least from what it looked like on TV, every other play was just like a typical, just bring this guy down. With those two, and like, you knew it was a thing because Marlo Wax tried it multiple times on Martinez, and if the captain's doing it, you know, lead by example here. And obviously Grant was successful in that. And I think what the craziest part was is that you watched it on TV, and I don't know what it was like in the dome, but on TV it was really clear that Restrepo was not down. And I thought that they were reviewing whether or not Grant had stepped out of bounds rather than if he was down before the ball got popped out.
Yeah,
and
so from where I was...
And just to confirm, Restrepo did have a fumble last week against Wake Forest.
Uh,
So 2
Yeah.
straight weeks with a fumble for Restrepo.
so I was sitting straight on my seats where Grant entered the end zone. My seats are directly up from that. So I was watching kind of the back of Restrepo.
Oh, so you
And
had the
then-
perfect angle.
Well, it was hilarious because like we saw Restrepo, and then we saw ball come flying loose. Grant basically pick it up off the dribble and just start sprinting at us, and we're like, "What's going on?" Like, okay, this is great, but it was complete from and it's not much better from the press box, but from the distances, like the clarity of what you can actually see live is always questionable. Hence why if you were in our Slack or in our text message group, I'm constantly, hey, what actually happened there? What's going on? Because for some reason the Dome isn't also very good at putting replays up on the giant replay board they have.
The thing
Yeah,
is,
that might also
I
that
think
might be
this
ACC, but
no, this has been a Dome thing for a while. They like to not put replays up over controversial plays, and the Dome cameras at least are instructed to follow the ball instead of follow the players. So,
Crazy.
I mean, that's just how the Dome cameras and the video board is operated.
Oh yeah, and it's eminently frustrating when you're watching it live.
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, people forget also, Grant almost had an interception in this game also. That was so very, very close.
He was kicking
Yeah.
himself about that one.
I mean, like that was the kind of point I wanted to bring up with the Cam Ward discussion is that Cam Ward tried to Cam Ward this game a couple of times and got bailed out by some lack of execution on Syracuse's side. There was that obvious drop. There was the one where he threw it over the middle and the ball just kind of kicked around like a ping pong ball until it ended up on the ground. Then there's multiple times where again an improvising quarterback is going to potentially throw this game away. But instead, if you're a Miami fan, you tip your hat to Kyle McCord and Syracuse. You tip your hat to Devin Grant and the Syracuse defensive adjustments. Your scapegoat here is Mario Cristobal.
Oh my God!
I can only imagine.
Oh my God!
I called
in the Dome because at home, my dad is going, why doesn't he call a timeout? Why isn't he calling a timeout? Why isn't he calling a timeout? I was going, why didn't he go for it on 4th and goal?
Yeah.
Why would you not like the fact that everybody watching in different vantage points was going, oh, he's about to do it again was the cherry on top of this cake.
I turned to Dan Tortora sitting next to me in the press box and literally went, this is 4 down territory, right? And then I see the kicker walk out and my hands go to my head and I turn to Dan again and say, what is Cristobal doing? He's throwing for content. And that's exactly what happened.
Well,
I think it was third.
He burned 30 seconds trying to get the field goal unit out there.
That too. He burned 30 seconds. He already lost 1 timeout due to dome noise.
Yep.
And also, like what? It was really funny to also, once that play happened, and once the kicking unit started coming out, me refreshing Twitter and immediately seeing Dan Orlovsky tweeting Miami should 100% go for this.
Yeah. Well, and that's even on 3rd down. I looked at my friends.
Yeah, that's what I said. I said this is 4 down territory.
Oh yeah. No, like heading into before the 3rd down play, my buddy and I were, talking about whatever. And he's like, so what are they doing? I'm like, or what are they going to do if they make, or if 4 down comes up? And I literally said to him, this is Mario Cristobal. He's probably going to kick it when he should go for it, or go for it on 4th. It's too easy to script this man. If there's a dumb maneuver to take, he seems to take it.
Andy, I have a question.
Ask away.
Do you think Mario Cristobal can get something from Home Field Apparel to cheer him up?
the only thing that's more consistent than Mario Cristobal blowing a game with time-wasting antics is how comfortable and how consistent you are going to find the home field apparel line of clothing. Steve wearing one of their baseball tees. I am wearing the 1959 National Championship shirt in honor of Fran Brown, letting everybody know that this is the standard that is now at Syracuse. But if you are a Miami fan and want a pullover or a coach's jacket because you think you could do a better job than Mario Cristobal, which more power to you, and I don't necessarily disagree, but they are running their biggest sale ever, Black Friday, Cyber Monday. Everything is 30% off through tomorrow at midnight. That includes the pullovers, that includes the bomber jackets, that includes the hoodies, the t-shirts, whatever. Doesn't matter if you've ordered from them before. Use promo code BFCM24 for 30% off your entire order through Tuesday at midnight. And if for some reason you are listening to this podcast and you go, dang it, I missed that sale, then you can use promo code NUNES24, NUNES24, for 15% off your first order at Home Field Apparel. Get on that Black Friday sale. It's amazing. My wife and I were in matching Home Field Apparel core collection sweaters over the weekend. She has the maroon hoodie. I have the maroon pullover as I was watching my Sports Saturday start off well with Arsenal, which, by the way, Christian, we are enemies this week. There's there's a lot to love over at a Home Field Apparel. If you're a Miami fan, if you're a Syracuse fan, if you're just generally a fan of college sports or really quality t-shirts, hoodies, the like. So I think to kind of put a bow on this Syracuse-Miami conversation, Steve, you're the old man here. The TV broadcast had made it clear that if you did not know this, Mario Cristobal was on the offensive line for the Miami team that came to the Dome and almost lost to Syracuse back in 1989, I believe it was. Maybe 1990, I don't remember, with Marvin Graves at quarterback, the 16-10 loss where they got the ball to the 1 yard line as time expired. Mario Cristobal was on that team. Donovan McNabb obviously had a big win over Miami in his time. It feels not that this is going to be Syracuse's new rivalry tradition, but it does feel nice to play an old Big East rival in a game that quote unquote matters. I think when you look back at this season, this is obviously the highlight. This is obviously the topper. But if, for you two guys here, is this the highlight of the Fran Brown era for both of you? Just like you're up in Syracuse, does this feel like the ultimate capper to Fran Brown's first season?
You talk first or I talk first? What do you want to
I'll
do?
do it.
Okay.
Because I think it is absolutely yes. Because what were all the questions that we had asked about Fran Brown going in? We knew he could recruit. I think that was a given based on his track record at Georgia, Rutgers, Temple, you name it, Baylor. You knew he could recruit. He brought on a pretty good coaching staff who he knew could recruit. The biggest question we had about Fran Brown was, could he coach? You knew he was going to bring in players. He brought in Kyle McCord. He brought in Jackson Meeks. He brought in Devin Grant. He brought in so many players who have come in to make an impact on this team. But the question always for Fran Brown, the lingering question that we always had in the back of our mind while Syracuse was bringing in these big-name recruits and getting big-name commitments in December, January, February, March, April. The question we always kept asking here on this podcast, and a lot of other people were also asking, was, can Fran Brown coach? And a 9-3 record with a win over the number 6 ranked team in the CFP rankings goes to show that Fran Brown can definitively coach. And that puts the capper on this season and is the highlight of this season that shows that Syracuse did make the right choice in the coaching hire that they did undertake a little over a year ago.
Yeah. to put it in quick and succinct terms, we were driving away from the Dome, and my buddy turned to me in the car and said, "Have you renewed the seasons yet? And if not, why not?" This is a guy who signed up for seasons this year because of the hype of Fran, and Fran is delivering on that, and people are buying in. And that Miami, like, if you were in the Dome for that Miami win and you don't buy seasons next year, something is wrong with you.
I mean, this is how I know fans were excited about that game. I had left the Dome after going to the press conference and, attending the press conference, listening to the players, asking questions, things like that. I had left the Dome in my car, driving home. It's a while after the game is done. And the cops are still out there on the streets, patrolling traffic.
Oh, yeah. Weirdly,
Usually they're long gone.
Yeah, like we took off relatively quick. Watched the storming of the field for a while and did the whole, and then just bolted because we're like, for one, like all three of us had to get back to our kids and whatnot. And
yeah, I was going to say you has children,
and family, and we're like, oh yeah, if we were 10 years younger, like we'd be out whooping it up at the Dome or on the hill, because there was definitely a feel of that going, like about to go down up there. But when we took off, I've never gotten that was literally the quickest I've ever gotten off the hill because everybody was still staying up there. Like there was no traffic leaving the hill right after the game, as opposed to most other games where it's just a madhouse. It was insane.
It felt like, just from, again, like what really sucked is that the TV coverage cut away so quickly because it was bleeding into the LSU kickoff time. So thanks for that, ESPN.
Did you get to watch our new quarterback for next year? Didn't see Richie Collins entered the portal, so
yeah, I did not. I actually did not watch that game at all because I was just, oh my gosh, we just beat Miami. But it feel like watching the GIFs and watching the reaction of Fran after the game. Like that was a guy who I think has been vindicated in a way that we probably didn't hear it, but I was listening to a Stephen Godfrey does a podcast, like this is does a Black Friday, Black Monday coaches podcast talking about which coaches are going to be fired, which coaches are not going to be fired. And that was where I got the Virginia Tech nugget, was that Brent Pry's seat is hot because everyone is looking at Syracuse and going, wait, Fran Brown did what in year one? And Stephen Godfrey made the point that I don't think a lot of people didn't necessarily anticipate it, but Fran came with a playbook of how he could take Georgia and make it work at Syracuse. And there's about to be a very stark split in college football among the programs that are going to do what is necessary to exist at the highest level of college football and the programs that don't necessarily want to do that. And he wasn't even talking about a, FBS versus FCS or a Power 3 or a Power 4 versus a Group of 5. He was talking about how Stanford and UNC don't necessarily want to go all in on the things that you need to do to build competitive rosters that win you games and lift you to the top of the conference. And if you would have asked me before the season, I would have said Syracuse was in that camp. We are happy to be the nice academic institution. We are happy to have sports, win a few games, go to a bowl every so often, and be the nice, prestigious option available to people who are playing the sport. And I don't think that's what John Wildhack wants Syracuse football to be, because you don't go out and make a hire like Fran and give Fran the resources that they've given him in order to make it happen. And I feel like this win vindicates to Fran that plan is actionable, that plan is workable, And so let's keep funneling the resources into this because we can do more. This was just year one. We still have things being built around campus. We still have NIL foundations and collectives being consolidated and still being organized. Like, there's another level to this. And this is that little taste to say, like, oh, you want to do this all the time? Like, we're close. We're really close.
Remember a couple years ago or last year when we were talking about all the conference alignment stuff happening? And we were talking about, Syracuse was in very, very big danger of getting left behind by the cream of the crop of the college football world. And because, college football in this modern day and age is what rules athletics in the college world. If you have a successful college football program, it springboards into the rest of your athletic programs.
Yes.
And we were having this discussion about, should the ACC fold? Because, it still looks like until something changes otherwise that might happen. There was still a non-zero chance of that happening just based on the current landscape of college athletics. Syracuse is not really, at least back, a couple years ago when conference realignment was happening, wasn't really an attractive option for another conference to add. And now, based on the momentum that Freeman has built in just this one season, the building blocks are there to make Syracuse an even more attractive option, which is a marketed improvement to where we were not just 14, 15 months ago.
I was going to say, 2 years ago, if you'd have told me what you just stated, I would have said, go home, you're drunk. Like, that there's no chance in hell. And here we are. I don't get it. I don't understand it. And I'm not going to complain about it. You know what's really insane?
The fact that Fran has got a 2027 quarterback recruit committed last night.
Also that. The fact that it is December 1st, we're talking on a podcast about Syracuse athletics, and we haven't even sniffed mentioning that we have a basketball team.
No, we have not, and we should probably get to that. But there is one more thing that we need to talk about. The next time that we podcast, there's probably going to be mention of a bowl game. So for those,
right.
Yeah. So for those that are unaware, the playoff has thrown a little bit of a wrench into a process that was already messy. For those of you that might not remember last year, the ACC got rid of the automatic seeding for bowl affiliations a couple of years ago and went back to the old let the bowl organizers call and negotiate with athletic directors and coaches method. Turns out it was terrible. And it's why Syracuse didn't know its bowl destination until Monday morning, because the ACC was dealing with the fact that Notre Dame didn't really want to go to El Paso, that there was a whole lot of things that needed to be worked out, and horses needed to be traded. Syracuse ends up in Boca Raton. I can report through some sourcing that there are 3 bowls that have reached out and begun preliminary conversations with Syracuse. This does not mean that these bowls will take Syracuse, does not mean that Syracuse will go to these bowls. It just means that these bowl organizers have reached out to John Wildhack and Fran Brown in the football program and said, like, what is your level of interest? Do you think you could sell tickets? Usually these conversations happen when the conference has essentially said, look, these are the bands of teams that you can be looking at. Right now, Syracuse has been in contact with the Holiday Bowl, the Gator Bowl, and the Citrus Bowl. So what's interesting about these bowls, the Gator Bowl is probably the most likely on paper, just because that's typically where one of the best non-ACC champions ends up every year. It's in Jacksonville, obviously a talent-rich area that Syracuse would love to get in front of recruits with. And it is there's some history there with Syracuse and the Gator Bowl. Holiday Bowl is another, what I like to call a legacy bowl, where that one to the, probably older than, probably to our parents, all of us to our parents' generation, the Holiday Bowl means something that doesn't really mean anything else to a lot of people, but it's a beautiful bowl, and John Casilla would be incredibly happy. The Citrus Bowl is interesting because the Citrus Bowl is a Big Ten versus SEC game. However, if you look at how the bowl allotment works, there is a good chance that the Big Ten and SEC won't have enough teams to fill their allotted bowl games due to the college football playoff and the fact that this year it looks like there are more 6-6 teams than there are bowl slots available. So you start getting this horse trading between different bowls. And if those of you are keeping track at home, the Citrus Bowl shares the same facility and shares a lot of the same resources as the Pop-Tarts Bowl, which is in fact an ACC allotted bowl. So again, not saying Syracuse is going to go to any of those three bowls, just think it's interesting that those are the three bowls that are at least jumping out and reaching out to Syracuse here. I think the biggest thing that we should take away from this is that usually when the Pinstripe Bowl is involved, they reach out to Syracuse early, and those agreements are made very aggressively ahead of time. It does not appear as if Syracuse will be going to the Pinstripe Bowl this year. Probably for some, that's a relief. For others, it's a bit of a letdown, like myself and Christian, who would like the very easy trip. But I'm just kind of curious, Steve, we can kind of start with you. Do you have any hopes for this bowl season other than, look, if Syracuse gets to play on New Year's Day, cool. If not, whatever.
I think it would be absolutely amazing for the program. I think it would be something that, seeing a New Year's adjacent bowl would be a level of success we haven't seen in a while, and is something that I guess just feels good. Give me Orlando so I can make the trip very cheaply, and why not? Like $100 flights from Syracuse to Orlando, sign me up. Jacksonville, a little tougher to get to. San Diego, bit of a flight. But yeah, I'll gladly, if we end up in the Citrus, and it's only fitting we would end up in the Citrus. To take the fam down there, hang out at Disney for a day or two, and go see a bowl game.
I've pulled up the 2023 games that happened at each respective bowl so that fans can get a gander of the kind of the quality of teams that the bowls were taking last year. 2023 Gator Bowl was Clemson versus Kentucky. Clemson at 8-4 and a 22 ranking in the CFP versus a 7-5 Kentucky team, which ended in a 38-35 Clemson win. The Citrus Bowl was LSU versus Purdue, and this was an LSU team that was 9-4 with a 17 ranking in the CFP, who destroyed Purdue and who had interim coach Brian Brom at the time. And the 2023 Holiday Bowl was between 10-3 Louisville, who was 15 in the CFP, against 7-5 USC. So the quality of teams are pretty decent, at least in the conversations for those bowls. That was a 42-28 win for USC over Louisville last year. So again, I'm like, just those three bowls alone, Syracuse is getting a quality opponent and something that fans, boosters, recruits are going to like to see in a bowl game.
Yeah, and I think obviously the big question is who plays. I don't think we have any indication of that for another couple of weeks, because they'll want to see the bowl. They'll have to talk to scouts. I think Oronde is probably a safe not play just due to his injury history. Kyle McCord to me is a strong maybe, just because for all the records that he set this year, his draft stock with most NFL guys is still undrafted, which is kind of wild to me, but also I think is just due to recency bias with a lot of people seeing Kyle McCord in the Pitt game. The Miami game probably has changed some minds there. I do think it's going to be interesting because I think Fran cares about going 10-3. And I think the team will care about going 10-3 if Fran cares about going 10-3.
Yeah.
And it'll be,
It's good.
but we know that the team has depth and we know that the team has freshmen that Fran would more than happily give a bone to and reward and say, you worked hard all season long. Like, here's a bowl game to play in. And I think that, again, is like another data point to what can we expect under Fran Brown at Syracuse.
It's going to be a lot like the 2018 game. You heard the commentator for that game. I forget who it was now at this time. Something tells me that it was West Durham, but I could be wrong. But the commentary team had said like multiple times, the 10th win means a lot to that team. And like you said, Andy, I think Fran is going to really want to see double digits at the end of his first season as Syracuse football head coach.
Yeah, I mean, Steve, we talked about it last time it happened when we were just starting to mess around with the show. 10 wins is something that happened 2001. And before that, we've got a run of 90s where we were close, but not quite. It doesn't happen often here, but it did happen in that era that Fran Brown desperately wants to bring back.
Yeah. And that's still always the hilarious thing, because that era that Fran Brown wants to bring back was considered a golden era of Syracuse football. And our record right now is better than a lot of those years.
I think that is going to be an off-season piece. I'm gonna teaser here. I'm working on bringing a guest onto the show who I think would be really fun to talk about that with. But we'll remain to see if that happens. To something that Steve mentioned, there's 3 minutes left in our hour-long timer here, and we have not mentioned basketball. I did not watch any basketball after the UConn game. I do not know. And I'm talking about UConn football game. So I have no idea what happened this week in basketball. I hear we played another team in upstate New York. Did we win?
We did. We went down 81, or they came up 81. We did win by 10 points. It was closer than it should have been late. They pulled away at the end. There were some very impressive things happening from freshmen. Beyond that, it was a game, and we won.
Donnie Freeman and Elijah Moore were your leading scorers. It's the first double-digit win for Syracuse this season. And if you tell Syracuse basketball fans that, they might have an aneurysm. So let's avoid that topic for them.
It's less of an aneurysm than UConn fans are having.
This is indeed true. Dan Hurley is having a special one right now and does not want to be associated with the state of Hawaii for the foreseeable future.
He's taking his ball and going home like a petulant child.
It's really funny. We were bringing up the one of my favorite moments as well of Dan Hurley when his first year against UConn, beating Syracuse in MSG, hyping up his players so much after the win, and then immediately composing himself to have the handshake with Jim Boeheim, which was just one of the funniest clips that I've seen in quite some time. I will say, just to have a little bit of basketball discussion, it's getting really, really hard to justify Jaquan Carlos having more playing time over Elijah Moore.
Yeah.
And especially over that last game.
Very true. And it was kind of a coming out part, well, a continuation of Moore's, but like Freeman kind of finally showed what the hype was about to a degree. And I think these kids are getting a little bit more comfortable, and we should hopefully see some good things moving forward. But that's going to be tested coming up here Tuesday. Is that the SEC Challenge?
Yes, and it's against Tennessee.
That will be a game of basketball that will be played.
I don't love where that's going. Not gonna lie. But this is also just a reminder that Syracuse is gonna be playing Tennessee a lot for the orange emoji, and I don't know how I feel about that. Playing Syracuse, playing Tennessee in basketball this year, and we are playing them in football next year. You know, just things that happen. I don't want to go 0-2 in those games, and we might be relying on football to do something here.
Chick-fil-A want to make a nice donation to the Orange NIL funds.
Yeah, honestly, that might be my Christmas gift this year. Let's do that.
Donate to the Orange NIL funds.
Honestly,
Shout out to the Clemson fans who were donating to the Orange NIL funds in honor of.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw that on the social medias, Andy, but
I did not. But that is amazing, and that makes me happy because Dabo doesn't want that NIL money, so give it to us. Just give it to us.
He will accept FaceTime calls from Fran though, so that's nice to know.
Yeah. I'm okay with that. Oh my goodness. I am out of football things to talk about. Do you guys have more things to talk about?
Again, recruits. Portal.
Yes.
Am I going to have to start the spreadsheet up again?
You are.
God damn it.
Again, let's continue to put things in perspective like we did the entire offseason last year. Syracuse has to commit in the class of 2027. And for some reason, like these in-season, quote-unquote in-season commits feel a lot more solid than the off-season commits.
It's all weird. None of it feels real.
I mean, you've already mentioned transfer portal stuff. We talked about LSU's quarterback into the transfer portal. The other two names that are in the transfer portal that a lot of Syracuse fans are talking about right now. One of them fans will be very familiar with NC State wide receiver Casey Concepcion, 2023 ACC Freshman of the Year, is into the portal, and also a Georgia cornerback is in the transfer portal in Julian Humphrey,
who was in the portal last year, withdrew his name, and is now back in the portal.
Yeah, and given Fran's previous job, fans are, of course, immediately putting 2 and 2 together.
Wonder who his coach was 2 years ago.
Oh, I don't know.
Some guy.
Very interesting, to say the least.
Remember again when years past, we'd be dedicating 15 minutes at least for every recruit that committed to Syracuse.
We would just have a recruiting podcast at that point.
Yeah. That's what next week's probably going to be.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah.
I'm excited to see who comes in and who commits. Again, we've got some names that we're looking at, but I'm
Because remember, it was about next week. It was about that time when we saw Hibachis and Ferraris roll into the dome.
Yeah, and this time that they've got a 9-3 team to recruit with, which again, not that Fran's going after that area, but there's a good chance that Purdue is going to be looking at changing head coaches. UNC is obviously open. See where the dominoes fall with UNC. Maybe that opens up some more areas. I think that we are in an interesting. The recruiting season is going to be interesting now that Fran actually backed up his talk with an amazing season, and I think that is going to lead us to be even more surprised than we were last year, and we were really surprised last year.
One thing I will say to end this all off, Temple has hired Casey Keeler to be their new head coach. Jeff Nixon and Elijah Robertson were names that were floated early on in coaching talks for that Temple head coaching job, but they have hired someone else.
Yeah, and Keeler from Pennsylvania, he's a Texas guy, but originally from Pennsylvania. So they did end up going with a local guy there instead of Nixon or Robinson. But again, like we're kind of mentioning here, there's still a lot of movement to happen. Fran has obviously wants to keep these guys, but is not going to get in the way of them taking a job that's better. And right now, Syracuse is ranked number 23rd in the AP poll. So there's only 22 teams that are better than Syracuse to offer these guys jobs at OC or DC or a head coach. So we'll see.
You didn't think you'd be saying that for...
What are we?
You
We're
didn't think you'd be saying that for quite
coaches,
some
right?
time, huh?
What was that?
We're 25 in the coaches, right?
Yes.
25 in the coaches, 23 in the AP, and we'll see where the
Number
playoff
one
ones
in
are.
your hearts.
Steve sending us out the right way. Thank you for listening to this week's edition of the Disloyal Idiots on Fans First Sports Network. This, as always, Steve, Christian, and myself, we appreciate your support. Make sure that you like and subscribe on the podcast platform of choice. It helps us trick the AI into expanding the Ottoman Empire. Thank you so much if you were watching us live on Twitch or on Twitter or YouTube. We are here every Sunday night-ish at 8 p.m.-ish doing this and talking Syracuse sports, especially after big wins. Thank you if you were watching or listening to this on newsmagician.com, our sister site. We really appreciate the continued support over there. And obviously you can read some of our works over there consistently as well. And also shout out to Home Field Apparel, sponsor as always, getting us through yet another football season. This time, not as good as Indiana, but still pretty damn good. Make sure you head over to their Black Friday sale, BFCM24 for 30% off your entire order until Tuesday, noons 2/4 for 15% off your first order if you miss that sale. Gentlemen, Syracuse is finishing the regular season ranked 9-3 and with a win over a top 10 opponent. This is better than I could have imagined, and I couldn't have done it with any other podcast hosts. We love you all. We love the Orange. Thank you, Frame Brown, for bringing this back to something that I didn't get to live through, but Steve sure did, and it was a great time. But this is way better. Go Orange.
You guys technically lived through it. I
Remember,
just
kids?
remember it.
Remember, kids, the final lesson of the day: don't kick a field goal down 7 with 4 minutes left to go.
Yeah, don't crystal ball it. Go Orange.
Go Orange.
Orange.